Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation. And so as part of the IHA Health Literacy Conference, we will be doing a presentation over using media to improve mental health literacy in the Asian American community. And this will be done by several members of Compassionate Home Action Together, a Chat Together, a mental health initiative where we do advocacy, education, and research affiliated with the Yale School of Medicine. So starting off, we're going to give some background information on Asian Americans, some stressors, and other factors. So first of all, looking at Asian Americans, what is the term AAPI? Well, AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islander. And as this is an acronym, we see that there are a lot of limitations that come with it, and that this umbrella term probably does not take every single piece of diversity that's in the Asian American community. And talking about diversity, so people may think that cultural groups that make up this community are homogenous. However, there is vast diversity in ethnic or racial groups, and also in some of the things mentioned on the slide, so nationality, origin, languages, beliefs, and more. And now looking at some cultural barriers that may exist in families. So for example, between parents and their children, youth and their grandchildren, some of these barriers can make some stress. And so we'll talk about some of these. So looking at a study from 2012 from Lee et al., we see some potential sources of stress, specifically from the family. So first of all, parental pressure to succeed. And so Asian American parents put high expectations to get good grades, engage in extracurriculars, go to college. And so to do this, a lot of youth feel like they had to do activities that didn't interest them, or they just had stress with dealing with all these expectations. And so when youth went against this, they felt like a lot of their parents started to criticize their effort or compare them to others. And next is for pressure trying to balance two different cultures. So for example, participants found it a little bit difficult trying to be true and be invested in their native culture and also do the same with the American culture, and found it hard to juggle. And next with cultural kind of beliefs or obligations. So for example, in a lot of Asian American cultures, it is a big deal to take care of your parents when they get older. And so some participants felt like this is a lot on their shoulders. And next, looking at a study from 2020 from Aurora Ku also found another source of stress, internalized pressure. So for example, participants said that they really pushed themselves to succeed, and this could give them stress. Now, so we looked at intergenerational differences in the past slide, but going more in depth. So there's something called intergenerational cultural dissonance. And this is just when cultural values or just belief systems in general really differ between generations, and this can disrupt family processes. So looking at first generation families, there appears to be higher levels of a cultural conflict. So this can be seen when there are different expectations between children and their parents in family interactions, education, career goals, and dating. And to combat this, many first generation American Asian immigrant parents may become more strict and demand their children to stick with their native cultural values. And next, so this is more of a specialized issue, specifically looking at Southeast Asian war refugees. So for example, those who come from Hmong, Cambodian, or Vietnamese origin. And looking at this, intergenerational trauma has an effect indirectly with mental health outcomes. So maternal and intergenerational trauma in general, and specifically here, indirectly influences mental health outcomes in which the children may experience depressive symptoms, antisocial behavior, and more. And because we have a lot of these intergenerational differences, we can expect that with these, there's a lot of difference on opinion, especially with quote unquote taboo issues. So this can be seen in all communities, for example, beliefs on the LGBT community, racism, abortion, and more. And so specifically looking at one issue or one topic of interest, the LGBT community, and whether it's accepted or not. So looking at a study from Sung et al., differences in immigrant parents and their LGBT children were found, and the children felt a lot of stress, and family conflict went up when they came out. A study by Chung and Szymanski in 2008 found that LGBT children really avoided the topic of sexual orientation and found it difficult for their parents to accept them. And lastly, with the study from Huang et al. 2016, parents of gay siblings reacted to their identity with denial, disapproval, and worry. And because we have all these differences in opinion, barriers to communication, stressors, we can expect that this could perhaps influence mental health. And so just in general, a lot of literature displays that there is higher levels of mental health issues in Asian Americans, in Asian American youth in particular. And by looking at different populations, we can see that children of immigrants is also at risk and Asian immigrant origin youth. So these first generation younger Asian immigrants. And so a lot of this can be tied to mental health literacy. So we'll define some of these first. So first, looking at overall health literacy. So health literacy is the degree to which someone has the capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information, and well enough so that they can make well-informed decisions. And more in depth is mental health literacy, which is knowledge and beliefs about mental illness that aid their recognition, management, and prevention, and to also recognize when a disorder is developing, looking at help-seeking options, and how to support others. And lacking mental health literacy may negatively impact a person's physical and mental health. And a study from Bernstein et al. Found that in general, 60% of Korean Americans had low health literacy. And another study from the National Center of Education Statistics found that 31% of AAPI showed below basic health literacy. And with mental health literacy in particular, in a study by Lee et al. In 2010, low mental health literacy in elderly refugees was seen. And so how can we better this mental health literacy for Asian populations, especially for Asian American youth, as that group is at risk and they can be influenced by all the factors that we talked about before. So looking at a study by Bernstein et al. In 2018, the relationship between stigma and attitudes towards service use was mediated in this case by depression literacy. So education programs focused on increasing mental health literacy may be effective in decreasing stigma. And also to reduce stigma in Asian Americans, cultural context can be used in mental health care. And in general, we do want to be careful about saying Asian American cultural values because Asian Americans are so diverse because it ranges from, for example, like Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Japan, Bangladesh. There are so many differences, but specifically looking at, like, for example, Korean culture, and there is a individual sense of well-being that relates to the neighborhood and the family. And so there could be interventions and treatments that could be planned to target depression or mental health based on addressing these group norms and beliefs. And so, for example, we could have awareness programs, and also health professionals like nurses could be aware of traditional values and the stigma that exists in this population towards mental health.
Mental health is a pressing issue within the AAPI community. As a demographic, Asian Americans have one of the lowest rates of mental health help seeking in the US. This is especially troubling given that AAPI groups have a high estimated lifetime prevalence of mental disorders such as mood disorders, anxiety, etc. Before we go deeper into this conversation, it is important to acknowledge that the terms Asian American and AAPI are huge and often inadequate umbrella terms to cover more than 40 different ethnicities. It is important to remember that there are important differences that can contribute to their help-seeking behaviors. For instance, Chinese Americans were found to underutilize mental health services due to the perceived shame rather than mistrust in Western health services, whereas cultural mistrust is one of the factors that relates to negative help-seeking behaviors among Filipino Americans. As a whole, however, there are general similarities in terms of the overarching themes that contribute to AAPI reluctance towards seeking out mental health services. The two that we will discuss today are communication barriers, including language barriers in health literacy, and cultural attitudes towards mental health. Now we're going to talk about cultural factors. So in general, within the Asian American community, there are high levels of stigma associated with mental health, with mental illness. Many communities attribute mental illness to a personal weakness. In general, the stigma can also extend to family members. Oh my God, re-record this. Okay, 1, 2, 3, slide 2. In general, within the AAPI community, there are high levels of stigma associated with mental illness. So many communities may attribute mental illness to a personal weakness. And this stigma can extend not only to the person, but also to their loved ones, their family members. And therefore, help seeking is understandably discouraged given the level of scrutiny and shame it can bring on a family. Another interesting cultural difference found by C and Haslam is that AAPI conceptualizations of mental illness can be narrower than those of other groups, such as white participants, therefore leading to symptoms being attributed to other factors or an underestimation of the severity of the illness. So in this way, individuals might be even more reluctant to seek help. They don't think they have a problem. Even though I've separated out language and cultural barriers, it's important to note that cultural attitudes towards mental illness can contribute to language barriers and vice versa. As Doe and colleagues in 2020 found, although younger Vietnamese Americans had developed a more open and less stigmatizing attitude towards mental illness, they continued to be unwilling to seek care for mental health issues. So this can be due in part to the lack of vocabulary around mental illness, as well as the existing vocabulary being maybe derogatory, hindering efforts to productive dialogue. So another barrier that we're going to discuss is language. It can be hard to seek help when you don't have the vocabulary to describe what's going on. And in some Asian languages, the lack of terminology contributes to people's reluctance to discuss mental health issues, as stated earlier. So for instance, in Indian languages such as Urdu, while there are words to describe negative feelings such as sadness, grief, or devastation, there isn't really a set terminology to describe mental illness the way it's talked about in the US. Furthermore, language can contribute to stigma. In Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong, for instance, the old term for schizophrenia was quite derogatory and carried connotations of it being untreatable, permanent, and conferred immense stigma on the people who carried that label. I've put down the terms here, but as you can see, they all translate somewhat to like split mind disease, mind split disease, which definitely doesn't paint a very pretty picture. In all these cases, this term was replaced with a new label, one that kind of implied that it could be healed and was less stigmatizing. For instance, the Korean new word was attunement disorder, and that in itself, attunement kind of conferred the implication that your brain could be retuned or fixed. So there is a cure for your illness. Another undeniable factor is just the language barrier in general. If English is not your first language, it can be daunting and discouraging to have to speak to a mental health professional or to be faced with terminology you don't understand. On this note, an APA report found that 1 in 2 Asian Americans suffering from mental illness will not seek help due to a language barrier. So what do we do? Well, acculturation isn't a solution, as evidenced by current rates of mental health help seeking and cross-generational studies. Even younger generations of Asian Americans rank low on help seeking behaviors. What studies have indicated to be promising, however, is targeting the family unit. So for instance, looking at where the most frequent help seeking behavior, what the most frequent help seeking behaviors are, within Asian Americans, it seems that seeking advice or help from friends or family is one of the more cited ones. And this in turn is promising for us in terms of thinking about what we can do to help improve help seeking behaviors. Toe and colleagues in 2011, for instance, noted that the use of mental health services by first or second gen Asian Americans was strongly influenced by their cohesion of their families. The family can be a very strong factor in terms of encouraging or discouraging help seeking. And that's why at Chat Together, we're hoping to target families. We're trying to create dialogue within families to help them have these important conversations about mental health.
And so our group, Chat Together, short for Compassionate Home Action Together, aims to address these barriers faced by Asian American communities through varying creative mediums. Our group was founded by Dr. Eunice Yuan, an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Yale Child Study Center in 2019, during the midst of the COVID pandemic to address unique emotional distress faced by Asian American families. We are now composed of both Yale and non-Yale affiliates, ranging from high school students to grad students to community members. Chat Together utilizes interactive theater, or skits, that feature cross-cultural child-parent conflicts to facilitate child-parent communication, break down stigma, and develop effective coping skills in a culturally sensitive manner within Asian American communities and families. Our team also has various research projects about Asian American mental health, some of which that discuss the benefits of using skits to facilitate discussion, or that have started from academic questions that have arisen from the skits themselves. Finally, our team also aims to address barriers to Asian American mental health through public education and community engagement. Many of these projects have expanded on our use of interactive theater to include other forms of creative mediums, from graphic novels and comics to story circles. So what exactly do we mean when we say creative media? Essentially, creative media refers to artistic or cultural works that are distributed through a variety of new and traditional platforms. And so from here, we'll go into the various mediums that Chat Together has used to talk about mental health within Asian American communities. Our main medium at Chat Together is interactive theater, also known as skits. These skits are created through improvisational theater. Group members improvise a scenario or conflict between an Asian American parent and child around a certain topic. And these improvised and more natural interactions are developed into a script that's ultimately written down and performed by actors. Topics have ranged from talking about mental health issues like depression or alcoholism, other sources of familial conflict like language barriers or picking a different major as a college student, and addressing social issues to parents, such as anti-Asian racism or the Black Lives Matter movement. These skits are divided into 3 sections. The first section demonstrates a problematic scenario in which the parent responds negatively to the child and in an unsupportive manner. This is then followed by a moderator section in which the 2 actors and moderator discuss what happened in the skit and ways communication could have been improved. The third section shows an alternative scenario in which these modifications or improvements in communication are made and implemented, and we see a more positive and supportive dialogue between children and their parents. Because of COVID, most of our skits are recorded online and posted on YouTube as a resource for anyone to use. We've also had some in-person talks and sessions in which in-person reenactments of the skits are demonstrated. And hopefully one day these skits could be used or modified to be used in a clinical intervention in psychotherapy or psychiatry. Using theater and filmmaking or videos for these skits allows for a real visualization of a potential conversation that's common among Asian American families. Both children and parents can see themselves in these moments, realize what may be causing issues, and learn how to better communicate their feelings.
Chat Together also utilizes graphic media to engage a larger public audience on meaningful discussions on topics of Asian American mental health. Graphic media, such as infographics and graphic novels, have several advantages when used in the public health realm to help tackle communication barriers. Infographics in multiple languages such as these provide bite-sized, digestible amount of information, and they're designed to be visually appealing and entertaining, which helps to retain audiences. And they have a low barrier to access and are made easy to share to a large audience of all ages and locations. And well-designed media can provide a thought-provoking and meaningful way to engage the target audience that point out and challenge the intergenerational assumptions and prejudices regarding negative emotions and mental health, helping to break down some of the barriers to communication and help lead discussions on potentially sensitive topics. One of Chat Together's digital media projects is Emotion Flashcards, which is a graphic arts project where we introduce emotion words in English, Chinese, and Korean. And we describe how these emotions may be experienced in Asian American households, giving both cultural and intergenerational context. For example, the emotion flashcard awkward describes how that emotion may be felt by a Korean American grandchild who has difficulty engaging in a conversation with her grandmother due to a language barrier. The same emotion is described from the grandmother's perspective in her native language to describe how that emotion may be felt. For example, a grandmother feels awkward trying to talk to her granddaughter because they've not had much opportunities to talk before, and she doesn't know what her granddaughter is interested in. She also feels awkward about taking away her granddaughter's time by trying to engage with her. These cards give the vocabulary to talk about these emotions with their family by teaching English-speaking children the word in their family's native language and teaching the non-English speaking members the English words. But it also validates the experiences of having these emotions and offers intergenerational perspectives that neither the grandparent nor the grandchild may have considered before. Facilitating understanding of generational differences may help spark a discussion within households. Graphic novels is another avenue of graphic media that Chat Together has produced. Graphic novels are able to illustrate entertaining and enticing stories that may not have been told on traditional media. Stories of Asian American youth and parents, and stories Asian American families can relate to. For example, in a graphic novel on depression and anxiety surrounding academic pressures, inner narratives of children and parents navigating cultural expectations and prejudices surrounding mental health help illustrate the challenges from both the parent and child's perspective. And it also helps to illustrate some strategies to overcome that. And sharing these graphic novels via social media to friends and families may be another way to start a conversation on these topics that may have been otherwise ignored. The online presence of Chat Together has grown, and it allowed avenues to engage with various organizations in person by forging connections both locally and nationally. Locally, Chat Together has been involved with the Yale Asian American Cultural Center. Chat Together actually received a wellness grant for an event focusing on Asian American family stories to reflect on what resiliency, well-being, and mental health mean for Asian American families. Chat Together also hosted a Q&A and discussion section on the topic of being queer and Asian, focusing on navigating family dynamics as a queer Asian and the impact it can have on mental health. Chat Together has also partnered with Choate Rosemary Hall, a local high school, to host sessions on cultural literacy for international students. Nationally, Chat Together was invited to be part of a panel discussion held by the United Chinese Americans, a nonprofit civic engagement organization, to discuss racism and violence and how Asian American parents can have effective communication with their children on topics that may be distressing, such as the Atlanta shooting or the Ukrainian conflict. Chat Together has also been invited by the UN to produce skits on addressing anti-Asian American hate. Academically, Chat Together has produced many oral and poster presentations on topics ranging from anti-Asian racism during the COVID pandemic, culture-based support for Asian American youths, how to talk about anti-Black racism in families using interactive theater, as well as how to use graphic novels and skits to educate and destigmatize mental health. And we also get to present to you at this conference on the topic of health literacy and how Chat Together tries to help tackle that.
In terms of Chat Together's future directions, we hope to continue making our impact in three main ways: community outreach, digital media production, and presentations to increase awareness of our work. So, what exactly are we planning in addition to the initiatives mentioned earlier? Under community outreach, we're planning to partner with an organization that will increase our connection to AAPI artists based in New York City and promote art as a vehicle for communication and social change. Through other social media platforms, such as Instagram, we'll continue posting our skits and flashcards. This will promote new campaigns that will increase understandings of healthy communication strategies in Asian families. We also hope to expand our reach, particularly to other young Asian Americans, by producing fresh content that relates to the Asian American experience. This may include short-form content like skits, collaborations with other Asian advocacy organizations on their digital platforms, and relatable content centered on the Asian American experience. Moreover, we're looking to use Instagram as a form of community outreach by engaging other AAPI artists in our communities to work with us in developing future content-driven initiatives. You can stay updated on our Instagram by following @ChatTogetherWithUs. On the side of digital media, we are currently collaborating with San Francisco Chinatown in creating our next skit called How to Talk About Sex Within Immigrant Families. Conversations about sex in immigrant families are often deemed as taboo, and such stigma can cause barriers in healthy child-to-parent communication. Using our SKIP model, we're aiming to address this stigma and create pathways for healthy conversations to be had about sex.
Another aspect of Chat Together's future direction for digital media is to diversify and expand the archive of skits that are currently available. For instance, Chat Together was a recent recipient for an advocacy and collaboration grant from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. This grant will be used to improve the mental well-being in Asian American and Pacific Islander children through a healing program. Drama vignettes, such as animations and skits, will be used in this program to facilitate child-parent communication. It will also focus on promoting conversations that address issues on intergenerational trauma, such as acclimation and acculturative gaps. Lastly, we aim to further extend our engagement through presentations. During this month of May, we will be holding another event partnered with the United Chinese Association to showcase one of our skits titled Parents of All the Solutions, which explores conversations between a child and a parent about mental health issues. The skit hopes to provide the means for parents to effectively communicate with their children. And in the future, we hope to increase our involvement with intersectional identities by partaking in more events like Chat Together's presentation at the Yale Women's Mental Health Conference. In this conference, Chat Together presented a skit that hopes to achieve a better understanding of cross-cultural challenges in women's mental health in the AAPI community. We thank you all so much for attending our presentation, and we hope that we were able to provide insight on Chat Together's mission of addressing cross-cultural barriers within the mental health space using creative media, as well as Chat Together's achievements and future directions.
Hi, everybody. So just before we close off, we do want to thank you for coming to the end of our presentation. And we also want to thank our presenters, who are Brandon Lee, Franzel Taulan, Yukyung Lee, Julia Zong, Violet Tan, and Ashley Benhayon. And just to continue our journey, and if you want to see the continuation of our journey in bettering communication between Asian American families, and also just spreading awareness about mental health in the Asian American community through advocacy, education, research, and more, we ask that you can follow us. And so this QR code will bring you to one of our social media sites. And we're also active on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And these are some of the centers that sponsor us, Seal Child Study Center, and our logo here. So thank you so much for watching our presentation. And we hope that you enjoyed and that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.